The boy's name was Eli, though almost no one ever asked him what it was. At 12 years old, he had already learned that names mattered less than survival. Every morning before the sun rose over the cracked sidewalks of the city, Eli woke up beneath the torn blue tarp he shared with two other homeless men who came and went like ghosts. His stomach usually ached before his eyes even opened, but hunger had become such a familiar companion that it no longer scared him. What scared him was silence, the kind that meant nobody cared if you disappeared. Eli's parents had been gone for 3 years. Taken by a car accident on a rainy night he still relived in his dreams. Since then, the streets had raised him, teaching him harsh lessons quickly. Don't trust easily. Don't cry in public and never expect kindness for free. Still, despite everything, Eli carried something rare inside him, an instinct to help, even when he had nothing to give. That instinct would change his life forever on a cold autumn afternoon by the river. The riverbank was one of Eli's usual spots. Tourists passed through, joggers pretended not to see him, and sometimes, if he was lucky, someone would drop spare change into his dented cup. That day the wind cut sharper than usual, rattling the dry leaves along the water's edge. Eli was about to move on when he noticed an older woman, sitting alone on a low rock near the river, dressed too nicely for the rough weather. She wore white, clean, expensive white, and a small gold pendant rested against her chest. At first Eli assumed she was just another rich person enjoying the scenery, the kind who might wrinkle their nose if he came too close. He turned away. But then he heard it, a sound so faint it almost blended into the wind. A gasp, then another. Eli froze and looked back. The woman's hands were trembling. Her face had gone pale, her lips tinged blue. She tried to stand, failed, and collapsed sideways toward the water. People walked by. Some glanced. None stopped. Eli didn't think, he ran, his shoes filled with icy water as he splashed toward her, grabbing her arm just as her body slipped into the river. She was heavier than she looked, and panic surged through him. But he locked his jaw and pulled with everything he had. Her breathing was shallow, broken, like her lungs were forgetting how to work. "Ma'am," he said, his voice shaking. "Stay with me, please." He dragged her onto the muddy shore, his hands numb, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He remembered something one of the shelter volunteers had once shown him, how to check breathing, how to call for help. His hands shook as he pressed them to her chest, counting. Too slow, way too slow. He shouted for help, but the river swallowed his voice. So he did the only thing he could. He stayed. He rubbed her arms to keep her warm, talked nonstop so she wouldn't slip away, tearing off his thin jacket to cover her even though it left him shivering. Minutes passed, like 2 hours before sirens finally screamed in the distance. Paramedics rushed in, pushing Eli aside gently but firmly. He stumbled back, soaked and shaking, watching as they worked on her with urgency that told him how close she'd been to dying. One of them looked at him surprised. "You saved her," the man said. Eli didn't answer. He just nodded, suddenly embarrassed, suddenly aware of how he looked. Dirty clothes, bare hands smeared with mud. When the ambulance doors closed, the woman was alive. Oxygen mask on her face, eyes fluttering open for just a second. In that second, she looked straight at Eli, her eyes filled with tears. Her lips moved, though no sound came out. Then she was gone. Eli stood alone by the river again, the world snapping back to normal like nothing had happened. No applause. No thank you. Just cold air and hunger gnawing at his belly. He sat on the same rock she'd been on and hugged his knees, wondering why he'd bothered. Heroes didn't get fed. Heroes didn't get warm beds. As dusk fell, a police officer approached him, not to thank him, but to ask questions: name, age, where are your parents? Eli answered with the same tired honesty. The officer sighed, wrote something down, and eventually left him with a warning to stay out of trouble. That night, Eli went to sleep believing the moment would fade like everything else in his life. He had no idea the woman he saved was Eleanor Whitmore, a self-made millionaire, owner of multiple real estate firms, a woman whose name carried weight in boardrooms and courtrooms across the city. He didn't know that as she lay in a private hospital room, surrounded by doctors and machines. She refused to sleep until she knew who the boy was. He didn't know that the gold pendant around her neck, the one he'd pressed his cold hands against, held a photograph of her own grandson lost years ago, about the same age as him, and he certainly didn't know that by choosing compassion over fear, He had just set into motion a chain of events that would shock an entire city. Eli woke up the next morning the same way he always did. Cold, hungry and invisible. The city didn't care that he had saved a life the day before. Traffic roared, people rushed past, and the river flowed on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He folded his damp jacket, the one he'd used to keep the woman warm, and tucked it under his arm like it was something sacred. He still didn't know why he felt so attached to it, only that letting it go felt wrong. Somewhere deep inside him, a quiet voice whispered that the story wasn't over yet. He ignored it. Hope was dangerous on the streets. Hope got you hurt. Across town, in a private hospital room that cost more per night than Eli had ever held in his hands, Eleanor Whitmore stared at the ceiling, fully awake. Doctors had told her she was lucky another few minutes in that freezing water, and her heart would have stopped. But luck wasn't what filled her thoughts. It was the boy. The way his, hands trembled but never let go. The way he spoke to her like she mattered. She had seen many faces in her life, employees, investors, lawyers, but never one that carried that much courage wrapped in such thin skin. When her assistant arrived with a tablet and a list of urgent business calls, Eleanor waved it away. "Find the boy," she said softly but firmly. "The one who saved me." The assistant hesitated. "There are thousands of boys," she replied. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "Then start with the river." It took hours. Security footage, witness interviews, a street vendor who remembered a soaked kid shivering by the ambulance. By evening, they had a name, or at least a first one, Eli, 12. No fixed address. Eleanor closed her eyes as if struck. "Bring him to me," she said, but gently. "He doesn't owe me anything." Meanwhile, Eli was facing a different kind of danger. A group of older boys had noticed the jacket. Still damp, but clearly not cheap. On the streets, anything nice painted a target on your back. They cornered him near an alley, mocking him, demanding he hand it over. Eli stood his ground until a black SUV rolled to a stop nearby. The engine purred like a warning. The boys scattered. A man stepped out, calm, well-dressed. "Eli?" he asked. Eli's heart raced. He was used to running from cars like that, not toward them. When Eli entered the hospital, he felt like he'd stepped onto another planet. Everything smelled clean. Too clean. His shoes squeaked on the polished floor. Eleanor saw him before he saw her. She was sitting up now, pale but strong, the gold pendant resting against her chest. When Eli finally looked at her, he froze. "You're alive," he whispered. Eleanor smiled, tears spilling freely. "Because of you." She reached for his hands, the same hands that had saved her, and held them like they might disappear. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she asked the question that shattered her heart. "Where is your family?" Eli answered simply. "They're gone." Eleanor nodded slowly, swallowing something heavy. "So is mine," she said. "In more ways than one." What Eleanor did next wasn't impulsive, it was intentional. She didn't offer pity. She offered opportunity. She arranged for Eli to have a safe place to stay. Education, therapy, food, not as charity but as investment. "The world invested in me once," she told him. "I'm just returning the favor." When the media caught wind of the story, headlines exploded. "Homeless boy saves millionaire." Cameras followed Eli, but Eleanor shielded him fiercely. "He's not a headline," she said. "He's a child." Months passed. Eli grew stronger, smiled more, slept without fear. But the real shock came a year later, when Eleanor stood on a stage at a packed press conference and made an announcement that stunned everyone. She was transferring the majority of her wealth into a foundation run in Eli's name, dedicated to homeless children, education and emergency response. "This boy saved my life," she